This is On Shifting Ground. I'm Ray Suarez. In the U.S., among those most troubled by the conflict in Gaza are American Muslims who've expressed significant dissent over President Biden's pro-Israel stance, and an alienated Muslim and Arab voter base, which in recent cycles overwhelmingly voted Democratic, could spell trouble for Biden in November. As early presidential polls suggest, he's lagging behind Trump in several pivotal swing states. How influential will Muslim and Arab voters be in persuading President Biden to reassess his position on Israel? And would they be willing to risk a second Trump presidency, the return of the leader who instituted what came to be called a Muslim ban during his first days in the Oval Office? I'm joined by Nihad Awad, a board member of CARE Action. Awad has been at this a long time. As part of the American Muslim Political Coordinating Committee, he helped create the first Muslim voting bloc ahead of the 2000 elections. And he was one of the Muslim leaders invited to the White House by former President George W. Bush after the 2001 terrorist attacks against the U.S. He has been calling for a permanent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip and an adherence to international law for all parties involved. Nihad Awad, welcome to On Shifting Ground.
Thank you.
What efforts have Muslim Americans taken since October to urge a change in Biden administration policy?
They have done a lot because simply this is a catastrophic humanitarian situation that America has been heavily and deeply involved for decades. That's why they feel they're morally obligated to speak up and speak truth to power. Their views are felt by the majority of the American people, which is civilians have to be saved from bombardment, from starvation, and from ethnic cleansing. And that's why they have been rallying in the streets along with so many Americans and young American Jews who never buy into the myth that an ethnic or religious state should be built on the ruins of another nation and another population just because they happen to be different in faith or ethnicity. That is the Palestinian people who have been the victims of this war and genocide for decades. So they have been communicating with their elected representatives. They have been speaking and communicating with the White House, with Congress. They have been in the streets rallying with social justice people all over the country, and they have been echoing the rising voices of people all over the world, as you can see on social media almost on a daily basis.
Well, the United States and Israel have been close diplomatically and in many other ways since 1948, when the United States became one of the first nations to recognize the existence of the State of Israel. With attempts to get the White House to see this in another way, I'm sure you do realize that you're walking into a fairly long relationship with a lot of history here and trying to do something difficult politically and get the White House to do something difficult politically.
Ray, this is a very personal issue for me. Since you mentioned 1948, actually, my parents, my family, have been ethnically cleansed and physically forced out of their home from the city of Lod next to Tel Aviv in 1948. And they were made homeless. They had to walk on foot to other towns to survive, and they ended up being refugees in Jordan. That's where I and many of my siblings were born and raised in refugee camps. So this is very personal for me. And I'm sure people identify with what it means to be a refugee, what it means to be kicked out from your home and the home of your ancestors who have been there for thousands of years, just because some politicians in Washington, D.C. decided to grant some people permission and green light to take over my home, my land, my farm, and without any recourse, without any consideration to our humanity. Now, for me, being an American citizen, now I have that voice. I have that power to speak to my president, to my elected representatives, to say, look, this historic injustice has to take a different course. You cannot unconditionally and blindly arm and support the state of Israel with my taxpayer money and with tax dollars from every American. You cannot continue to inflict this injustice and denying our humanity and our existence. This injustice has to change, has to end.
Well, recently, the Vice President Kamala Harris, speaking for the administration, called for a ceasefire. And now the plans have been announced for the U.S. military to build a temporary port in Gaza in order to widen the channel for international aid. Do you see these as positive events?
They are positive, but they're not sufficient. And let me tell you why. If the United States government is willing only to drop some food for the starving population while providing Israel with the bombs and missiles to continue to bomb, maim the Palestinian people, that sends a very contradictory message. The United States is telling Israel, go ahead, continue to kill, including civilians, children, women, who are the majority of these victims, and we will continue to supply you with all the sophisticated weapons and destructive weapons that you need. However, please, because of the mounting public pressure against us, try to handle the civilian population better and allow relief aid to get in. Israel ignored the president on both counts. As the president himself admitted, Israel is indiscriminately bombing the Palestinians. Second, Israel is not even allowing the relief aid to get into Gaza. And that shows the incompetency of this administration and our government to force our major, biggest foreign aid and military aid recipient from respecting international law. So the president's call is weak, too little, and too late.
Do you think it's still, at this point, fair? Do you think it's even accurate to say that the United States is giving the green light to Israel to kill civilians in Gaza? The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, the President, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, they have all expressed public misgivings about Israel's operations in Gaza and the lack of attempts to spare the civilian population during these attacks. I can understand why you're frustrated. I can understand why you don't think they've done enough. But do you think it's accurate to say that the United States has given Israel a green light to kill Palestinian civilians?
Yes, because the United States government is providing Israel with all the means to kill Palestinians. And if there's only one power, one person who can stop this war and the killings of the Palestinians, it's President Biden. And he chose not to do so. Israel cannot continue one day, literally one day, in its genocidal war against the Palestinians without the permission of the United States government, without the permission of President Biden. Benjamin Netanyahu does not care about the United States' desires and priorities. He cares about saving himself politically. So President Biden has to choose between the interests of the United States government and people and the interest of Benjamin Netanyahu. The two interests are colliding. He has a choice to save America and America's reputation and America's interest from the interest of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Israel is a rich country with a very large domestic military industry. It builds a lot of its own weapons and is capable of building many more. Is American aid really central, really critical to Israel's ability to continue to make war in Gaza?
Israel will not continue to be what it is now, which is a power that is practicing ethnic cleansing and apartheid by the recognition of major human rights organizations such as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the major Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem. Israel has been violating international law because of the support of the United States. Whether Israel is rich, it is rich because of the United States government's aid. Israel is being provided at least $3.4 billion and now is about to receive $14 billion. If you are an Israeli citizen, you have full insurance, you have health care. Israel is rich and strong because of our tax dollars that we send them for decades. So the average Israeli citizen is well off, much more than an average American today. The pro Israel lobbying machine has been working on our elected representatives for the past 75 years or more. And this is not me speaking. Just Google, go to Open Secrets, and look at the data, look at the information. It's mind boggling when you assess and look at the undue influence of the pro Israel organizations on our government's decisions. So today, the American public is awakening and is telling the president, wake up. The voters in Michigan are telling the president, wake up. The voters in Minnesota are telling him, wake up. His base is telling him, just realign yourself with the reality. You cannot do the old business of 50 or 60 years ago where the Palestinians have been voiceless and faceless. Today, this genocide is on play and people are watching it. It is the most documented genocide. The United States government cannot continue to do business as usual, allow the state of Israel to kill, maim, and ethnically cleanse people because of who they are, just because they have powerful representatives in Washington, D.C.
I'd like to talk with you some more about this idea that the country has changed. In 1948, in 1956, even in 1967, the modern era of immigration had not yet changed the demographics of the United States. Today, there are millions of Muslim Americans. Today, there are millions more Arab Americans. And I wonder if the change in modern America means a different calculus politically, when you're putting together coalitions, when you want to pressure the White House, when you want to question America's longstanding alliance with Israel. Do you do it with a different kind of muscle, with a different kind of confidence?
I agree with you, but also there are more factors. So yes, today the American Muslim and Arab American population is growing fast, and that provides more diversity and more reflection on who we represent as American politicians. But the more important reason, I believe, Ray, is the openness of the information, the flow of information. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 80s, there was monopoly over the information on the Israel-Palestine question. You could not see one news item, one critical point of view of the state of Israel or our foreign policy in the mainstream media. I came to the United States in the 1980s. I would hardly see any pro-Palestine statement or policy or a voice in Congress or in the media. Today, this is becoming public knowledge. Everyone is watching what's taking place, and they have been seeing contradictory realities. The reality on the ground that Israel is practicing apartheid, Israel is oppressing, Israel is killing and maiming and suffocating people, is imposing a siege, humanitarian siege, not allowing food, water, electricity, medicine. This is a modern era programs, and people are so horrified because they see it with their eyes. You see also young Jewish Americans who are revolting against their parents and their traditional organizations. They want these young people just to ignore the fact that Israel is violating international law every day. The social justice movement in America is becoming borderless, universal, and they are impacted by what's taking place in the world. And the flow of information through the internet and social media has opened the eyes to the point that all of this combined has pressured the mainstream media to level down with the general public, who does not only see the world through the eyes of, NPR, CNN, ABC News, the Washington Post. They see it from other sources. So now we started to see a playing field that's being leveled down, but it's going to take time to see our politicians realigning with this reality and freeing themselves to represent the American public and their interests for a longer term.
It's been widely reported, and it's pretty well understood, that the behind-the-scenes conversation that the Biden administration is having with Israel is different from the one that you see in public, and it has been since October. You and many other Muslim and Arab American leaders have said that's not enough. It's not enough that behind the scenes Israel is being pressured to stop what it's doing in Gaza. It has to be seen publicly to do it. Is it similarly a responsibility of Muslims in America who are pressuring the Biden administration to behave differently to also deplore Hamas and its work in Gaza and the actions of early October? Do they not only have to do it, but have to be seen to do it in much the way that you want the Biden administration to be seen to pull out its support for Israel's activity?
I think context is very important for every point of discussion, including the Palestinian struggle for freedom and liberation and democracy. The struggle for the liberation of Palestine has never been acknowledged by the United States government. The Palestinians have been blamed for their own suffering, for their own disposition, for the occupation of their land, for the siege that has been imposed on them in Gaza. The United States government and its allies, they have been blind, or they allowed themselves to overlook the reality on the ground. And they have justified Israel's behavior. Even as the UN Secretary General said, October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. October 6th, October 5th, October 4th, October 3rd, and many, many years to go, Israel has been killing and maiming and occupying. Israel has been enabling illegal settlers, even coming from the United States, from European countries, to violently take over Palestinian homes and killing them without any accountability. So October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. But also, to your point and to your question, Ray, we have condemned the killing and maiming and harming of civilian population on both sides ever since our existence as an organization and ever since we became active. The human life is the same. The human suffering is the same. The crying of children, both on the Israeli and Palestinian side, is the same. But there is no moral equivalency between the oppressed and the oppressor.
I'll repeat my question. Are you pressured in the real world of politics, where people are publicly calling on office holders to change their stance, where pressure is being exerted from different quarters in American life? Does it end up, justly or unjustly, being incumbent upon organizations calling for Israel to cease and desist what it's doing in Gaza to also deplore what happened in early October with a crossing of the border into Israel and a widespread attack on a large number of Israeli civilians?
Yes, look, we're all humans and we all have to hold people accountable. But this issue also has to be broken down. I said in one of my remarks that I was happy to see people breaking the siege and walking into their homeland. I was misquoted and taken out of context as justifying the attacks on civilian population. I will never do that, and I never said that, and I never meant that. However, we have to acknowledge that there's an illegal siege on the population of Gaza. If you were in Gaza, or if you are in Gaza, you are not allowed to leave the siege. You're not allowed to travel to seek education or seek medical treatment. There is a siege, real siege, by air, by land, by sea, against the civilian population in Gaza. If this is illegal, then it has to be broken. Israel was not willing to lift it, and no one is willing to lift it. You cannot allow people to live in a concentration camp. This is not a prison. A prison is if you commit a crime, then you serve your prison term. But this is a concentration camp. Now Israel is shooting a fish in a barrel. However, having said that, killing innocent people, including settlers who are illegal, this is illegal and should be condemned. We have to break down this complicated question, and we have to be morally responsible. President Biden has perpetuated Israeli lies after that when he claimed to have seen 40 beheaded children, and there was no evidence to that, and the White House had to retract what he said, but he never admitted that he made a mistake. That message that he said set the tone for the world to support what Israel is about to do based on lies and fabrications. So again, we have to deconstruct that complicated event, and we have to see it in the context that that Palestinian suffering has been ignored. The dehumanization of the Palestinian has been there for decades, and we cannot give a green light and a blank check for the occupier to continue their illegal and criminal practices against the civilian population. And when the civilian population rise and respond in accordance with international law, which they have the right to defend themselves, then we condemn them. We're not allowing them to be free. We're not breaking the siege for them, and we're just blaming them when they defend themselves.
You've talked about trying to change the long-standing orientation inside American governing circles toward this region in the world. Does the fact that this is a national election year offer you an opportunity to reopen this conversation with the people who govern this country from both parties that maybe you wouldn't have had in another year?
Absolutely. And sadly, I have to say this. Instead of relying on morality and law and international values, we spoke all this language, and the administration turned a blind eye and deaf ear. They did not hear us. And probably the only language now they may hear is our voting power. We and our allies have spoken loudly and clearly in Michigan, where 106,000 people voted uncommitted. 45,000 people in Minnesota voted uncommitted, and maybe more will vote uncommitted in other places. So they are sending a resounding message to the Biden campaign and Biden administration that his bid for a second term as president lies in the balance. It's in his hands, not in our hands. But we're just sending him a message that, look, if you did not listen to the language of humanity and law, we just have to remind you that we are the ones who will elect you or not elect you in November if you rely on our votes. He has to call for a permanent ceasefire once and for all, lift the siege on Gaza, rebuild Gaza, and allow the Palestinians to live the freedom that we all enjoy and other people enjoy.
Mr. Awad, is there a risk involved here when you put the possibility of the president's reelection in the balance by taking vital states for the Democrats like Michigan and putting them suddenly in toss-up status? Do you take a risk that you'll end up with a President Trump who's made it clear that he would advise the Israeli government to be even tougher in their prosecution of the war in Gaza?
Not us. The president himself is endangering his chances of becoming a president for a second term. It is him and his supporters in Congress who are endangering his chances of winning. We're like the canary in the mines. We are the sounding off board. But yes, would Trump become a president if we send a strong message to Mr. Biden? Well, for every risk, we know that there is a cost. But for me and for many voters, how many Palestinians should die until this administration's wake up? We're talking about more than 30,000 people who have been killed, mainly women and children. More than 100,000 people have been injured, and many are lost under the rubble. Gaza is becoming a deserted, bombed out place. How many should die until we say enough is enough to the Biden administration and even to the Democratic Party? If we cannot stop this genocide, we will not be able to prevent the next genocide from happening in the future. So I am aware that there is a cost, but what is the cost of allowing a genocide to happen and us watching and not even delivering a major pushback against this administration? I happen to believe, as a civil rights leader, that radical change needs radical power, and that is sometimes painful. No one should blame us or blackmail us with the coming of Trump. I'm not welcoming another Trump term, but we have to take this step no matter how painful it is. It is for the sake of our country. It is for the soul of our humanity. And yeah, these sacrifices are not cheap.
Inside your own councils, inside your own coalitions, are there differences of opinion? Let's face it, Trump is not a neutral party in this question. He's faulted Joe Biden for not backing Benjamin Netanyahu enough. He wants him to finish the job in Gaza and achieve total victory. He says he'll reimpose the ban on Muslim travelers and immigrants. Are you strategizing internally about what is involved in the future, depending on how you proceed?
I see your point, and let me just break it down. So we have two forces. We have a democratic leadership who doesn't care about the Palestinians, who are allowing genocide to happen, who are indifferent, who are trying to claim that they will feed the Palestinians while they are allowing for them to be killed. And that's not a party that deserves our support. And that is not a leadership that is worthy of the values that we sacrifice for as Americans. And this mindset within the Democratic Party has been taken us for granted for so many decades and so many generations. We have to put an end to this if the Democratic Party wants to live up to its claim that it is a big tent and they care about human rights at home and abroad. We are telling them, this is your chance. If not, you will lose us. Now, the second part is the Republican choice. We have lived under Trump. I don't welcome that era back, but we will continue to fight for change, whether it is within the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. But we cannot allow our friends to take us for granted and commit genocide in our name and our presence. The message for both parties is our community is and will continue to stand on principles and will push for its agenda, even if it's costly, because this cost is worth it.
Nihad Awad, thanks for joining us on Shifting Ground. Great to talk to you.
Same here. Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to On Shifting Ground, produced in partnership with KQED, with funding from listeners like you. Today's episode was produced by Adam Ailey and Sienna Barnes. It was mixed and mastered by Matteo Schimpf. Additional production and engineering were provided by Rob Spate. KQED's Jim Bennett is our technical supervisor. Jared Spord is our executive producer. Philip Yun is co-CEO of Commonwealth Club World Affairs. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ray Suarez. Thanks for listening.